Hi everyone, this is Chapter 4, the Iroquois Confederacy. This is a direct reading from the book Voices in Democracy, Action and Participation, written by J. Craig Harding and Alan Sears. This video has been created for educational purposes only for grade 6 social studies students of Alberta. It's supposed to be used as a support tool for students and teachers during this COVID pandemic. The Haudenosaunee feel that they have a message about peace and the environment, just as their ancestors did. In 1977, they made a speech to the United Nations. This is a part of it. Coming of the Peacemaker. Haudenosaunee is a word which means people who build, and is the proper name of the people of the Longhouse. The early history before the Indo-Europeans came explains that there was a time when the peoples of the North American forest experienced war and strife. It was during such a time that there came into this land one who carried words of peace. That one would come to be called the Peacemaker. The Peacemaker came to the people with a message that human beings should cease abusing one another. He stated that humans are capable of reason, thinking things through logically, that through that power of reason all men desire peace, and that it is necessary that the people organize to ensure that peace will be possible among the people who walk about on the earth. That was the original word about laws. Laws were originally made to prevent the abuse or harming of humans by other humans. The Peacemaker traveled among the people, going nation to nation, seeking those who would take up this way of peace, offering with it a way of reason and power. He journeyed first among the Kanien'kehá:ka, the people of the Flintstone, Mohawk, where he sought to speak to the most dangerous of those people, offering them his message. He traveled for a long time among the Mohawk, the people of the Standing Stone, the Oneida, the people of the hills, the Onondaga, the people of the swamp, Cayuga, and the people of the Great Hills, Seneca. Eventually, those 5 nations were the initial ones to take up the offer of peace. These nations gathered together in council, and there they set down the principles of what is called the Great Law of Peace. The Peacemaker gathered the nations under the Tree of Peace and recited the Great Law of Peace that they were to live by. Then their weapons were buried under the tree. A confederacy of 5 nations had been created. Eventually, in the early 1700s, a 6th nation, the Tuscarora, accepted the Peacemaker's message, and the 6 Nations, or Iroquois Confederacy, was complete. A confederacy is a partnership that is agreed on by nations or groups of people. Haudenosaunee is the name that the people of the 6 Nations call themselves. French settlers called them Iroquois, and the historical documents also use Iroquois. United Nations. The United Nations is an organization that works for world peace. It builds cooperation among countries and protects the rights of people. Most countries, including Canada, belong to the United Nations. What was Iroquois society like? Today, most Haudenosaunee live in the northeastern United States and southeastern Canada. Some of them still follow the ways of governing set by the Peacemaker. However, their way of life is much different than it was in the past. Before the coming of the Peacemaker, the nations that formed the Confederacy had been at war with one another for a long time. However, the 5 Iroquois nations actually had much in common with one another. Their homes, their social structure, and daily life in their village was very similar. The Longhouse. Longhouses were at the center of Iroquois society. Their nations were divided into 9 clans, which were led by clan mothers. All the people living in a longhouse were descendants of the same clan mother. Clans are identified by animals. These include the bear, wolf, turtle, snipe, eel, heron, hawk, beaver, and deer. Animal clans are related. A Mohawk of the turtle clan, for example, is a relative of the Seneca turtle clan. As the families grew larger, they would extend the longhouses by building onto the end. Some longhouses were almost as long as a football field. Small Iroquois villages had 4 or 5 longhouses. There could be 50 or more longhouses in a large village. An Iroquois clan is a large group of families who are related to one another. Each clan is associated with a different animal. Role of women. Women had positions of respect in Iroquois society. Carol Jacobs, Cayuga Bear Clan mother, describes women standing this way. In our traditions, it is women who carry the seeds, both of our own future generations and of the plant life. It is women who plant and tend the gardens and women who bear and raise the children. Women also own the property and homes. When a woman got married, her husband would come to live in her family's longhouse. Their children belonged to the mother's clan. The women raised corn, beans, and squash, which were the main food supply of the Iroquois. These crops are known as the Three Sisters. Clan mothers were the leaders of the clan. The title of clan mother was usually passed on to her female relatives, her sisters or her daughters. The Great Law of Peace gave the clan mother ownership of the chieftainship title. This means that clan mothers had the responsibility of selecting the chiefs for their own clan. Clan mothers today have as much importance and respect as they did in the past. In choosing a chief, the clan mother would look for characteristics such as honesty and kind-heartedness, ability to think clearly, knowledge of traditional ceremonies, loyalty to family, ability to uphold the great law, ability to represent the people fairly, and ability to withstand criticism. The role of Iroquois men. Although women headed the clans, men served as the chiefs on the Grand Council, which was the government of the Iroquois. The men organized cooperative hunting and fishing parties to provide meat for the village. They cut trees to make longhouses and canoes. They organized team sports such as lacrosse that were part of many seasonal celebrations. Lacrosse was a sport played for fun, but it also trained men for their other tasks in life. It built leadership skills as well as endurance, strength, and speed for hunting and warfare. Games would sometimes last for days. Wars were fought exclusively by men, although women often decided whether or not war was to be declared. Once the Confederacy was formed, fighting among the Iroquois stopped. However, warfare continued with nations that did not want to be a part of the Great Peace. Lacrosse. Lacrosse is still played in Canada. This First Nations sport has become Canada's national sport. How do you think this sport prepares players for other tasks in life? What was wampum used for? Wampum is strings or belts made up of white and purple beads that were cut from certain kinds of shells. Each string or belt held a different message. The use of wampum suggested the seriousness of the message and the sincerity of whoever made it. In Chapter 1, you read that Canada has a written constitution that sets out the rules of Canadian society. The Great Law of Peace is the constitution of the Iroquois. It describes principles of good living and tells how the Confederacy should be organized and run. The Great Law of Peace is so long that it would take days to recite the whole thing. In order to help them remember the Great Law, the Iroquois used wampum belts. A wampum keeper was responsible for caring for the wampum and reading it. The reader would pass his hands along the belt, bead by bead, using their texture to remind him of the events or treaties it recorded. Wampum keepers were chosen by the clan and trained from a very young age, younger than you are now, to remember the information on the belt and tell it in a dramatic and poetic way. Iroquois women made the wampum belts. The Hiawatha Wampum. Today, the Great Law of Peace exists as a written document. It was first recorded in English in about 1880. Now there are several versions of it. The Hiawatha Wampum is one of many belts and strings that describe the Great Law. Here are the meanings of the symbols on the Hiawatha wampum. From left to right, the 5 images represent the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca nations and their territories. The Onondaga symbol in the center also represents the Tree of Peace. The lines joining the 5 images show the connection of the 5 nations to one another. The 2 lines extending out from the square at the 2 ends of the belt are the path of peace by which other nations are welcome to join the Confederacy. The Great Law explains the white color on the Hiawatha belt this way. White here symbolizes that no evil or jealous thought shall creep into the minds of the chiefs while in council under the Great Peace. White, the emblem of peace, love, charity, and equity, surrounds and guards the 5 nations. Wampum often represented treaties among 2 groups of people. The wampum are primary sources that tell us about Iroquois history. The 2-row wampum treaty symbolized the relationship between the Iroquois and the European nations that settled in North America. 1 purple row of beads represented the path of the Iroquois canoe that carried their culture, law, and beliefs. This shows that the nations of the Iroquois Confederacy shared a collective identity. The other purple row represented the path of a sailing ship, carrying the Europeans' cultures, laws, and beliefs. The parallel paths show that neither group will try to interfere with the other. The 3 white background rows symbolize peace, friendship, and respect between the 2 groups. A collective identity is a shared belief system that often includes the same language, culture, values, and attitudes. Who was Hiawatha? Hiawatha traveled with the Peacemaker and helped him spread his message of peace among the Haudenosaunee. It is believed that Hiawatha lived sometime between 1100 and 1450. What we know about him comes through oral stories that have been passed down through the generations. These stories have now been written down. One of the stories tells about Hiawatha's great sorrow. Tadodaho, the chief of the Onondaga, was not interested in peace. He was an evil man who caused the death of Hiawatha's 3 daughters. In his sadness, Hiawatha went to live alone in the forest. He put shells on a string as he thought about his daughters. This was the first wampum. The Peacemaker found Hiawatha in the forest. Hiawatha was so sad that he could not see, hear, or speak. So the Peacemaker comforted him. He wiped the tears flowing from Hiawatha's eyes with soft deerskin. Peacemaker removed the obstruction in Hiawatha's ear with a feather. Finally, he gave Hiawatha cool water to drink, which cleared the obstruction in his throat. Now that Hiawatha could see, hear, and speak again, he was able to leave the forest to spread the good word of peace. Hiawatha and the Peacemaker eventually cleared the evil from the mind of Tadodaho. This allowed the Onondaga nation to join the Confederacy. Interpreting maps. What kind of information do maps give? Political maps tell you about the location of countries and cities. Historical maps, like the one in the middle, tell you what an area was like in the past. Physical maps provide information about features of land like rivers, mountains, and land elevation. Take a look at the maps below. How was the Confederacy structured? For the Iroquois, their confederacy could be compared to a huge longhouse that stretched over the whole territory where they lived. The 6 nations, Mohawk, Cayuga, Oneida, Seneca, Onondaga, and Tuscarora, lived together under its roof as a family. This longhouse sheltered their bond with each other and protected them from their enemies. The leaders in Iroquois society were the chiefs. The Great Law of Peace stated that it was their duty to be teachers and spiritual guides and to remind their people that the Creator wants them to live together forever in peace. The chiefs were treated with great respect because of their wisdom and other special qualities. However, they were considered the same as everyone else in society, not better or above others. They were the caretakers of the great law of peace and had responsibilities in many areas. The chiefs looked after the welfare of their people and ran the affairs of the clan, the nation, and the Confederacy. They also upheld the rule of law in their society. There were also war chiefs who were selected by each of the nation to sit on the Grand Council. In wartime, these chiefs had to gather warriors for fighting. Pine tree chiefs, who showed special abilities or had an interest in public affairs. They were selected to join the Grand Council by its chiefs. The Great Law of Peace established a Grand Council made up of 50 chiefs who represented the nations of the Confederacy. Nations with large populations had more chiefs than smaller nations, but they were all equal to one another. The Mohawk Nation had 9 chiefs, the Oneida Nation had 9 chiefs, the Onondaga Nation had 14 chiefs, the Cayuga Nation had 10 chiefs, and the Seneca Nation had 8 chiefs. The Tuscarora, who were not part of the original 5 nations named in the Great Law of Peace, were represented by the chiefs of the Oneida. The clan mother could remove a chief who was not doing his job properly. A chief might lose his position if he committed a serious crime such as murder, refused to attend meetings of the Grand Council, did not listen to and represent the views of the people, disobeyed the Great Law, or did not act with the welfare of the people in mind. New chiefs were chosen by the clan mother. The clan mother also ensured that all decisions made by the Grand Council agreed with the Great Law of Peace. They carefully watched over discussions and made sure that all voices were heard and treated respectfully. They pointed out any mistakes they saw to the chiefs. The 7th generation. One important responsibility of the Grand Council was to consider the 7th generation. The chiefs had to always keep in mind how the decisions they made would affect the lives of their people for 7 generations, more than 200 years into the future. This encouraged the chiefs to act cautiously so that the welfare of their descendants would be protected. In Canada today, we also expect our politicians to try to make decisions that will have positive effects on future generations. Do you think that governments are passing strong enough laws to protect the environment, healthcare, human rights? The Tree of Peace. The Tree of Peace is an important symbol of the Iroquois. The roots of the tree spread out to the north, south, east, and west, so that other nations could find the pathways to the Great Law. If any person or nation wishes to follow the Great Law of Peace, they are welcome to join the Iroquois under the tree. The eagle sits at the top of the tree to spot any approaching danger and warn the Iroquois. Before the planting, the Peacemaker asked the nations to throw their articles of war into the pit. He then planted the Tree of Peace over the weapons. In Chapter 2 and 3, you looked at rights and freedoms, representation and justice in Canada and ancient Athens. One of the ways these values are achieved in a democracy is by involving people in making decisions. How do people participate in decision-making in Canada? How do they participate in ancient Athens? The Great Law was written to ensure that the Iroquois could live together in peace and harmony. Here are some ways that democratic principles are built into decision-making under the Great Law. Although different nations had different numbers of chiefs in the Grand Council, there was equality among them. They all had the same level of authority. Authority was shared between men and women. Although only men were members of the Grand Council, it was the women who nominated the chiefs and could take away their title. The fact that people belonged to their mother's clan also gave authority to women. The clan system introduced by the Peacemaker helped to make sure that no one nation would ever be able to take over the Confederacy. Because people in each nation belonged to various clans, their loyalty was split between their clan and their nation. This balancing of loyalty worked to maintain democracy and unity within the Confederacy. Can you imagine how hard it would be to get all of the students in your class to agree on an issue? How would you go about it? Getting 5 different nations and the many clans within them to agree on issues was a challenge that the Peacemaker faced. The Great Law sets out a system of decision-making that allows everyone a voice and requires the agreement of all. This way of decision-making is called consensus. It was another way that fairness and equality were maintained in Iroquois society. Consensus requires people to be open-minded. They must be willing to think deeply about the issues and to listen to the ideas of others. The decision may not be their first choice, but they must be willing to support it in the best interest of the group. Decision-making in the Grand Council. The process of Grand Council decision-making is laid out in the Great Law of Peace. The chiefs were divided by nation for the discussions, and each nation had a role. The Mohawk and Seneca, who were the first to join the Confederacy, were known as the Elder Brothers. The Onondaga had the position of firekeepers. The Oneida and Cayuga were known as the Younger Brothers. The Onondaga were responsible for opening the Grand Council. They began by thanking the representatives of other nations for attending and announcing the subject that would be discussed. The Grand Council chose a speaker from among the Mohawk, Onondaga, or Seneca nations to conduct the meeting. The speaker held this position for 1 day. The next day, a new speaker would be chosen, or the first speaker could be reappointed by the council. During a Grand Council meeting, a chief's 2 faith keepers and his clan mother sat behind him to advise him and, if necessary, remind him of his responsibility to his people. Consulting the clans. You have seen that the Grand Council was the governing body of the Iroquois. However, the Great Law gave all the Iroquois the right to participate in decision-making. It describes one occasion in which the people were consulted this way. Whenever a especially important matter or a great emergency is presented before the Grand Council and the nature of the matter affects the entire body of the 5 nations, threatening their utter ruin, the chiefs of the Confederacy must submit the matter to the decision of their people, and the decision of the people shall affect the decision of the Grand Council. This decision shall be confirmation of the voice of the people. In your book, you have a diagram that shows how the clans are consulted. I'll read the diagram out loud. First, the clan has a meeting, and it gives everyone in the clan, women, men, children, and the elders, a chance to speak. The clan mother then informs the clan chief of the decision the clan reached by consensus. The clan chief carries the decision to the Council of Chiefs of the nation. The Council of Chiefs of the nation comes to a consensus and brings the decision to the Grand Council. Minority rights. Along with giving people the right to contribute to the decision-making process, the Great Law also acknowledges the unique identity of each nation. It states that nations will keep their own festivals and laws, and the chiefs of their nations continue to have the right to settle the affairs of their nations. Taking the rights of minorities into consideration in decision-making is an important way of keeping a society fair. What document protects minority rights in Canada? Roberta Jameson. Roberta Jameson is a member of the Mohawk Nation of the Grand River in southern Ontario. She was the first First Nations woman in Canada to earn a law degree. She was also the first woman to become a chief of the 6 nations of the Grand River, the reserve in Canada that has the most people living on it. In 1989, Roberta Jameson was appointed to a 10-year term as the Ombudsman of Ontario. An ombudsman is the person who investigates people's complaints about the government. The ombudsman can suggest changes to government policies or change unfair decisions. In this chapter, you have seen the importance of participation and consensus in Iroquois society. Roberta Jameson feels that her culture has had a great effect on her job as an ombudsman. She says, "First, Iroquois people have always placed a lot of importance on diplomacy, talking things over. We've placed a lot of influence on process, on reaching a consensus. knowing that if you spend the time to come to a genuine consensus, it will be long-lasting. She has used these traditional strategies to help people to reach agreement and solve problems. She tries to bring opposing sides together with the goal of reaching a solution that both can agree on. She encourages them to work together to find a solution rather than focusing on the ways they can disagree.